On May 18, 1985, a flight from London touches down at an airport in Moscow. Among the passengers is a senior KGB officer named Oleg Gordievsky, who holds the rank of colonel in state security and oversees the KGB's operations in London. This marks a highly prosperous career for someone so young. Gordievsky is just 46 years old. For the last 12 years, he has been the British Secret Service's most prized spy. For Gordievsky, this visit to Moscow poses a significant threat. The day before, he received an urgent summons from London for a meeting with his superiors, ostensibly to discuss his new assignment. However, it is likely just a cover story. If the KGB has somehow discovered his ties to the British Secret Service, it would mean not just the end of his career, but potentially his life as well. At Sheremetyevo Airport, there is no one waiting to meet the KGB colonel, which is highly unusual. Given his rank, the agency should have dispatched a vehicle with a driver. Gordievsky feels uneasy. The only thought offering him some solace is the belief that if the KGB intended to detain a traitor, they would have acted immediately upon his arrival. The colonel hops into a taxi and makes his way back to his apartment on Leninsky Prospect. Unbeknownst to the British spy, 2 hours earlier, KGB counterintelligence officers had raided his home. They meticulously searched the apartment, hidden listening devices behind the wallpaper and baseboards, and installed microphones on the phone while also placing cameras in the light fixtures. To top it off, they applied a special radioactive powder to Gordievsky's clothing and shoes. Although the concentration poses no health risks, it enables them to monitor a person's movements with a Geiger counter. As Gordievsky makes his way up to the 8th floor, he unlocks 2 locks, but the door remains unmoved. The 3rd lock, which was put in when the building was built, is secured, and throughout his time in this apartment, Gordievsky has never used it, lacking even a key. This can mean only one thing. His KGB colleagues have previously entered, searched the place, installed listening devices, and locked everything as they left. Realizing he is under surveillance and suspected of espionage, Gordievsky understands that the KGB is skilled at extracting information from individuals. Consequently, the odds of the colonel returning to London unscathed are exceedingly slim. The only conceivable punishment for a member of the Soviet Security Service caught collaborating with a foreign intelligence agency is death. Oleg Gordievsky understands this all too well. The 20th century has been filled with remarkable stories about the activities of secret services from different nations. However, if one were to select the most astonishing tale, it would undoubtedly be that of Oleg Gordievsky. For the KGB, this represents one of their significant blunders, while for the British Secret Service MI6, it stands as their most successful operation against the Soviet Union. This narrative is marked by unexpected turns and an incredible conclusion, featuring intricate characters and choices that impact not only their own lives, but also the destiny of all humanity. The Committee for State Security is a legendary institution. Views on its actions differ so dramatically that an entire universe could lie between conflicting perspectives. Nevertheless, what both the KGB's supporters and detractors cannot dispute is its significant impact on the nation's and the world's affairs. A portion of the KGB's all-encompassing image relates to its organizational structure. The agency engaged in counterintelligence, foreign intelligence, operational search activities, border security, and crime prevention, among other roles. And this is far from a complete list. In numerous Western nations, each of these functions was the responsibility of a different agency. In the Soviet Union, however, there existed a single, all-powerful Committee for State Security. At its height, the KGB employed over 1 million individuals, including officers, agents, and informants. Yet, the KGB functioned as an exclusive club. Usually, it wasn't a matter of choosing this role, it chose you. For many, a career in the KGB commenced during their student years, or soon after, when they were recruited by personnel from the organization. Oleg Gordievsky was, in some ways, born a Chekist. His father, Anton, was a dedicated communist and worked first for the NKVD and later for the KGB. The pinnacle of Anton Gordievsky's career occurred in the late 30s. The mass repressions and other controversial episodes in the history of the Soviet State Security Service did nothing to undermine the officer's conviction. Anton consistently asserted that the NKVD makes no mistakes. In 1938, he welcomed his son Oleg, who became the second child in the family. 6 years prior, they had welcomed an older brother, Vasily. The early signs of the future British spy, Oleg Gordievsky, could be traced to his mother, who did not share her husband's unwavering belief in the NKVD's infallibility, or to his grandmother, who secretly baptized his older brother Vasily without their father's knowledge. However, the real shift in values likely took place later. In the 50s, after completing his schooling, Oleg was a quintessential product of the Soviet system, a dedicated Komsomol member, an athlete, and an outstanding student who earned a silver medal. He enrolled in one of the nation's premier higher education institutions, MGIMO. The institute served as a training ground for diplomats, scholars, statesmen, and spies. The rigorous foreign language programs at MGIMO provided a direct route to positions in the KGB's overseas operations. This was precisely what Oleg Gordievsky sought. Soviet state security agents stationed abroad fell into two categories: legal and illegal. The former comprised officers who were deployed abroad under the guise of official diplomatic roles. This allowed them to sometimes function as consular staff, different attachés, or accredited journalists, though their primary responsibilities were to fulfill tasks for the KGB. The so-called illegals held no official status. Usually, they were dispatched to a country under false identities and with forged documents. Similar to legal spies, they recruited agents and informants, gathered classified information, or operated as sleepers. These agents led ordinary civilian lives but could be activated in times of war or significant conflict. Vasily Gordievsky was one such illegal operative. He began his KGB career while his younger brother was still a student at MGIMO. It was Vasily who suggested to his superior that his brother Oleg was well-versed in foreign languages and keen on a career in state security. Following an interview at Lubyanka, the younger Gordievsky received an offer for a 6-month internship with the KGB. Oleg went undercover as a translator at the embassy in East Berlin. His initial task was to meet a woman who had previously been a KGB informant. Gordievsky's role was simply to establish contact and gauge the informant's willingness to continue cooperating. According to Oleg, the conversation was brief and quite dull. It wasn't until later that he understood the meeting was a test, not for the informant, but for him. Decades later, Gordievsky would remember that significant doubts began to emerge in his Soviet worldview while he was still at the Institute. However, while this may be partially accurate, it is not the whole picture. He was aware of the Hungarian uprising in the 50s, which was crushed by Soviet tanks, and he had personally witnessed the construction of the Berlin Wall. During his time as a student, there was a thaw and a renouncement of the Stalin cult. However, after returning from his internship in Germany, Oleg Gordievsky chose to become a full-fledged employee of the KGB. One of the key reasons for this decision was that being part of the State Security Committee was not only prestigious, but also offered opportunities to work abroad. This was Gordievsky's aspiration. After all, he was just over 20 years old and simply wanted to explore the world. He simply sought adventure. A few days ago, I glanced at the calendar and made a small revelation. It turns out there's less time remaining until the May holidays than has passed since the start of this year. Honestly, it feels like just yesterday we were toasting with champagne, enjoying mandarins, and savoring Olivier salad. It seems we've already nearly completed a quarter of 2025. I'm certain many of you have contemplated traveling somewhere for May or summer. Yet it feels like there's still time. We can decide later, a bit later. Unfortunately, this mindset is not ideal for trip planning. The guiding principle here is the earlier, the better. Seasoned travelers quickly snatch up convenient and appealing options. That's just how it is. Therefore, it's wise to book a hotel or apartment for May or summer ahead of time now via Yandex. Travel. One of the primary advantages of the service is the vast selection of hundreds of thousands of hotels and apartments available. This ensures that everyone can find a great option suitable for their budget, location, and travel dates. Accommodations can be paid for with a card from any Russian bank, whether within Russia or abroad. If you were to ask me where to go for the May holidays, I would instantly recommend St. Petersburg. In springtime, the city on the Neva is truly stunning. This is well known not only by myself, someone who has lived in Petersburg for many years, but also by countless tourists eager to experience the city. Consequently, the best hotel and apartment options tend to disappear quickly, so it's advisable not to delay. Visit Yandex. Travel. Select St. Petersburg as your destination. Specify your dates, and the service will present you with suitable options. Using the filter system, you can specify parameters such as the number of stars, budget, breakfast availability, and other preferences. The service will promptly provide a range of excellent options. All that's left to do is to select what appeals to you based on location, design, and amenities, and then make a reservation. If you have any inquiries, 24/7 support is accessible through the app's chat. It's no wonder that over 20 million people utilize this service each month. By using the promo code ADVANCE, you can receive discounts of up to 20% on hotel and apartment bookings. Just follow the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen to start planning your vacation in advance with Yandex. Travel. Future KGB spies underwent rigorous training. They learned the art of intelligence and counterintelligence, including recruitment and agent management, weapon handling, hand-to-hand combat, how to detect surveillance, evade it, organize surveillance, and leave or retrieve packages, all while maintaining their cover as Soviet operatives. Such skills were crucial for the effective functioning of KGB personnel abroad. Alongside standard intelligence duties, their roles could also encompass less ethical activities such as disinformation, political manipulation, kidnapping, and assassination. All recruits who successfully completed their training took an oath, committing to serve their homeland faithfully until their last drop of blood. Oleg Gordievsky did the same. In the summer of 1963, he assumed his first full position within the state security ranks. To Oleg's great disappointment, he didn't receive the coveted assignment in one of the Western countries. Instead, he was stationed in Moscow. In a small office on Lubyanka, he spent his time handling routine paperwork for Department S, the KGB division responsible for illegal operations. This role lacked any exciting adventures or international travel. Gordievsky recognized that one of the primary barriers was his unmarried status, as the KGB refrained from sending unmarried employees abroad. The rationale was that a family man was far less likely to defect, as his wife and children would remain under the KGB's control. They met at the home of mutual acquaintances. Elena Okopyan appeared to be the ideal candidate for a wife, a German language teacher with aspirations of living abroad. While their swift marriage wasn't solely a strategic decision, romance certainly wasn't the leading factor. After their wedding, their opportunities for taking assignments abroad significantly improved. For Oleg, this eliminated the key barrier to his assignment. For Elena, her husband became her passport out of the USSR. After more than 2 years of handling paperwork at Lubyanka, Gordievsky was offered an open position at the KGB residency in Denmark. If someone had to select a single city to exemplify all the benefits of Western capitalist society to a Soviet individual in the mid-60s, it would likely be Copenhagen. This relatively small, clean, beautiful, and affluent European capital stood in stark contrast to the fairy tales of Andersen while remaining distant from Soviet reality. Officially, Oleg held the title of consular officer, but in truth, he was tasked with overseeing illegal operations within Denmark. In essence, Gordievsky spent his mornings managing visa responsibilities and his afternoons engaging in espionage. He was involved in leaving and retrieving drops of information for existing agents, providing them with money, overseeing their operations, and reporting back to his superiors. This may sound like typical spy work from the movies, and to some extent, it was. Consider the clever signals that illegal operatives devised for their handlers. For instance, an orange peel underneath a specific bench meant, "I am in danger," while a leftover apple core placed in the same location indicated that the agent was departing the country the following day. This covert activity needed to be carried out discreetly. The Danish intelligence services were fully aware that some employees at the Soviet embassy were KGB officers, which led them to maintain partial surveillance on those individuals. Evasion of surveillance was facilitated by intercepting radio messages from Danish agents, a task carried out by Gordievsky's wife, Elena. She had also secured a role within the KGB owing to her proficiency in foreign languages. Simultaneously, the operations of the KGB residency in Denmark had another aspect that would hardly make for an exhilarating spy movie narrative. This involved corrupting Soviet officers. Significant funds were allocated for recruiting informants and agents, as well as for maintaining those relationships with individuals willing to share sensitive information with the USSR. It was essential to take them out to restaurants, purchase desired gifts, and provide various other perks. Instead, many KGB employees concocted tales of their busy activities, penned fictitious reports, and embezzled money for themselves. Gordievsky sought to rise above this trend. He aimed to prove his effectiveness to his superiors. He was already fluent in German and Swedish, and after his assignment in Copenhagen, he promptly began studying Danish. Among his colleagues at the new office, only a handful knew the language. Most importantly, Gordievsky diligently carried out his primary responsibilities in managing illegal operatives within the country, while also striving to recruit new valuable agents. The head of political intelligence in Copenhagen, Mikhail Lyubimov, recognized the diligence and dedication of the new residency employee. One of the primary motivations behind Gordievsky's efforts to impress his superiors was his strong desire to continue working abroad. He found joy in Denmark, in Copenhagen, and in Western life, relishing the diverse range of goods, music, and books that were unavailable to Soviet citizens, along with other freedoms. One day, Gordievsky ventured into Copenhagen's red light district, where he stumbled upon adult products and magazines, including gay publications. Having never encountered anything like it before, the Soviet officer began to examine the images with considerable intrigue. At that moment, the Danish intelligence services were keeping an eye on him, suspecting Gordievsky of homosexuality. This presented a favorable opportunity for blackmail and eventual recruitment. Gradually, the Danes started to compile a case against Oleg Gordievsky. In their documents, he was identified by the pseudonym Uncle Kormsen. After a couple of years in Copenhagen, notable changes began to emerge in the worldview of the young KGB residency employee. Gordievsky's marriage was slowly unraveling. Despite Oleg's longing for freedom and Western values, his perspectives on family and women's roles remained quite conservative. Conversely, his wife Elena could be seen as a feminist for her time. She did not see herself as a submissive caretaker of the home. Ultimately, Elena disclosed that even before they left Moscow, she had secretly undergone an abortion. Simultaneously, significant political shifts were taking place in Eastern Europe. This pertained to the democratic reforms in Czechoslovakia in 1968, which became known as the Prague Spring. Gordievsky closely followed these events and sympathized with the reformers. At that time, he was unaware that his older brother Vasily was in Czechoslovakia as an illegal operative. Vasily was one of the agents sent by the KGB to sabotage liberalization efforts, engaging in disinformation, pressure tactics, and abductions. The Prague Spring came to a close in August 1968 when troops from the USSR and other Warsaw Pact countries invaded the nation. Gordievsky was heartbroken. One reason Oleg was profoundly impacted by the events was his closest university friend, Stanislav Kaplan. After studying in Moscow, Kaplan returned to Czechoslovakia and joined the intelligence services. However, during the Prague Spring events, he aligned himself with the reformers. Concurrently, Gordievsky began to face challenges in his professional life as well. Danish intelligence was increasingly keeping him under surveillance. They attempted to exploit the homosexuality angle by sending in a fellow agent to seduce him, but their efforts were unsuccessful. Firstly, Gordievsky was cautious enough to swiftly cut off contact. Secondly, he simply was not gay. Nonetheless, the KGB documented the intelligence activity concerning Gordievsky, interpreting it as a significant sign. They suspected that the Danes had discovered he was not merely an average consulate employee. The leadership halted all of Gordievsky's illegal operations and notified him that he would be transferred back to Moscow in a few months. The return to his homeland proved to be challenging. After 3 years in the western capitalist city of Copenhagen, Oleg Gordievsky found himself back in socialist Moscow. In his view, the contrast was stark and unfavorable to his home country. Oleg returned to his previous position in the same Department C where he had worked prior to his assignment in Denmark. The new role offered a modest promotion, but for Gordievsky, it wasn't a reason for celebration. He yearned for another posting abroad. It's uncertain when Oleg would have received such an opportunity, if ever, were it not for two significant events. The first was a major KGB failure, and the second was the unexpected death of his brother Vasily. In 1971, the largest expulsion of KGB personnel in British history occurred, with the British declaring over 100 individuals persona non grata due to suspicions of their involvement with Soviet intelligence. The catalyst for this situation was the defection of KGB officer Oleg Lealin in Britain, who revealed the identities of most of his colleagues. Since the Danish Secret Services actively collaborated with the British, the expulsion also impacted 3 KGB officers based in Copenhagen, who operated under diplomatic cover. As a result, a position for the head of political intelligence in Denmark became available. However, Department C's leadership staunchly refused to release Gordievsky. This decision changed with the unexpected death of his brother Vasily, who was also employed in the same KGB department. Gordievsky's older brother dedicated nearly his entire career to working as an illegal operative in various nations. Over the years, he developed severe alcohol issues, which ultimately contributed to his death at the age of 39. Following this event, Department C's leadership chose to allow Gordievsky to leave. The sole potential hindrance was obtaining a visa. The Danes could simply reject entry to any diplomat if they suspected he was an undercover intelligence agent. Given that Gordievsky was under active surveillance during his initial posting, it's reasonable to conclude that the Danish authorities harbored certain suspicions. Nevertheless, Gordievsky was issued a visa. Either the suspicions were not strong enough or the reason lay elsewhere. Immediately after the collapse of the Prague Spring in 1968, intelligence officer Stanislav Kaplan decided to defect. He took a vacation in Bulgaria and vanished. After a while, Kaplan reappeared in France, where he surrendered to Canadian authorities. The Canadian intelligence services had strong connections with British MI6, whose officers interrogated the defector. He revealed the names of around 100 individuals who could be of interest to Western intelligence. The vast majority on this list were Czechs, with only a few from the USSR. Among them was Oleg Gordievsky. Kaplan was well acquainted with his best friend from university. They both enjoyed running, pursued girls together, and loved discussing the concept of freedom. In Kaplan's view, Gordievsky might be open to cooperating with Western intelligence services. As a result, the British Foreign Intelligence Service began to cultivate a potential agent under the code name Sunbeam, or Sunny Ray, referring to Oleg Gordievsky. Considering the close collaboration between Danish and British intelligence agencies, the approval of Gordievsky's new diplomatic visa seems quite reasonable. It may have been linked to MI6's interest in recruiting a valuable asset. At the end of 1972, the Gordievsky family returned to Copenhagen once again. This time, Oleg held a higher position. Officially, he was the second secretary at the Soviet embassy, but unofficially, he was the head of political intelligence at the KGB's Danish residency. Now, his duties did not involve illegal operatives. The new role was more sophisticated, as political intelligence aimed to identify potential informants and agents among Danish politicians, public figures, journalists, diplomats, and others whose information could be valuable to the Soviet Union. Political intelligence also encompassed information influence, which involved disinformation and propaganda designed to promote a favorable image of the USSR while casting the West in a negative light. However, the KGB's Danish residency could only claim limited success. This was due not only to the laziness and corruption of some officers within the residency, but also to the mentality of the Danes. The locals were generally unwilling to collaborate with the KGB, and even members of the Danish Communist Party were not inclined towards open betrayal. Despite this, Gordievsky remained active in his work and showcased his enthusiasm and dedication to his superiors. As a result, he was promoted to the rank of major. Professionally, Oleg Gordievsky could regard his career as successful. By the time he was in his 30s, he held a prestigious rank along with an overseas role. At this pace, by the age of 40, he could have been leading the residency in one of the Western countries. However, the few years spent in Moscow between assignments in Copenhagen greatly eroded the officer's loyalty to the Soviet system, which he began to perceive as corrupt and hypocritical. In Denmark, Gordievsky started to read extensively, including works by Solzhenitsyn and other authors that were banned in the USSR. He learned about his university friend Kaplan's escape to the West. In essence, he was on the verge of deciding to collaborate with Western intelligence. He was unaware that Western intelligence was already strategizing on how to collaborate with him. Recruiting an agent is a delicate art of seduction. It requires showing enough interest while avoiding aggression that could alienate the potential contact. The British Secret Service had already encountered Gordievsky in person. The head of MI6's Danish residency had met the potential agent several times at receptions for diplomatic personnel from various nations. Gordievsky, a passionate admirer of art and classical music, always engaged enthusiastically in discussions about these subjects with Western diplomats, including the British. However, to establish direct contact with Gordievsky, MI6 decided to enlist the help of an outsider, someone Oleg knew very well. Stanislav Kaplan reached out to Gordievsky, indicating that he was passing through Copenhagen and suggesting a reunion between old friends. Oleg agreed to meet. During their encounter, he remained extremely cautious. Gordievsky sensed that the sudden appearance of his university friend was not coincidental, though he couldn't pinpoint who had sent Kaplan or why. Intelligence agencies from various nations frequently employed a method known as the honey trap, designed to earn the target's trust by offering what they desire, only to later expose them. For instance, the KGB could dispatch one of its operatives to a foreign diplomat suspected of working for intelligence. The KGB operative would present themselves as a disillusioned officer, willing to leak state secrets to Western agencies. Once the information exchange commenced, a trap would be set. The Western diplomat would subsequently be accused of espionage and expelled from the country. The same tactic could be employed by the Danes or the British with Gordievsky. Consequently, he refrained from saying anything compromising to Kaplan during their meeting. However, he made it clear at the end that he would not report their encounter to his superiors. It was akin to telling a potential lover, "My wife doesn't know I'm here." In summary, the intentions were unmistakably conveyed. In the subsequent meetings with Gordievsky, the head of the Danish residency of MI6 was also in attendance. At first, he subtly suggested that the British were aware that Gordievsky was not just a diplomat, but a KGB officer. Oleg maintained his caution, providing evasive responses, neither confirming nor denying anything. Eventually, the MI6 representative opted for a bold approach. He directly asked Gordievsky if he was open to cooperating. Oleg dodged the question. The British agent pressed further. "Who leads the KGB's political intelligence in the Danish residency?" he inquired. To everyone's surprise, Gordievsky replied, "I do." At that moment, he crossed a critical line. The KGB officer, bound by oath, agreed to collaborate with an intelligence service from another nation. In essence, Gordievsky committed an act of betrayal. Jerking memories from the past surged through his mind. His father, who had concealed the uncomfortable truth about his work throughout his life. His mother, who doubted the infallibility of the NKVD, the Hungarian uprising, the construction of the Berlin Wall, the escape of his best friend, his admiration for Western culture, a mounting revulsion for the Soviet regime, and a belief that his homeland could undergo change. All of these factors rendered the act of betrayal justifiable, at least in his view. Following the official commencement of cooperation with MI6, meetings between Gordievsky and his handlers began occurring monthly in a safe house on the outskirts of Copenhagen. The specifics of this new MI6 operation within the KGB were kept under strict confidentiality. British intelligence had never collaborated with an agent so thoroughly embedded within Soviet state security. A very limited number of individuals within British intelligence were aware of the operation, codenamed Sunny Beam. Only a select few knew the agent's true identity. Danish intelligence continued to periodically surveil Gordievsky as they suspected this Soviet embassy employee of KGB ties. The potential spy's monthly visits to the safe house on the outskirts of Copenhagen could draw attention from agents, and their reports or communications could endanger the entire operation. Within the Danish Secret Service, only a small group in leadership, were privy to the existence of this valuable MI6 agent. Ultimately, it was decided to lift surveillance off Gordievsky on the days of his meetings at the safe house. Initially, the British were vetting the new agent. They posed numerous questions to which they already knew the precise answers. Gordievsky's information did not just align, but also offered much more. He provided insights into the inner workings of KGB structures, including names, assignments, operational details, agent training methods, and even specifics regarding personal relationships among various employees. Tapes of recorded conversations were sent back to Britain by diplomats. According to international accords, representative suitcases were not subjected to searches at the border. This facilitated the covert transfer of data from the new agent straight to the leadership of MI6. As time went on, the British grew increasingly convinced that Gordievsky was not part of a clever KGB scheme. He proved to be trustworthy, his information was dependable, and he was eager to provide even more details. Oleg Gordievsky's life soon began to mimic a game of 3D chess. On one hand, he had to demonstrate successes to KGB leadership to achieve promotions, gain access to more valuable information, and ultimately relay it to MI6. On the other hand, he couldn't be too successful in his role as a spy, as it could endanger the security of Denmark or other Western nations. Simultaneously, it was essential that his betrayal remained unknown to the KGB. All interactions with MI6 had to be conducted with utmost caution and kept to a minimum. It was critical to remember that Gordievsky lived in the same apartment as an active KGB officer, his wife, Elena, whose marriage to him had devolved into a professional arrangement long ago. If she harbored any doubts about Gordievsky as a KGB officer, she was required to report them to her superiors. For a state security officer implicated in betrayal, there was only one possible outcome in the USSR: the death penalty. Amidst this already intricate life situation, Oleg Gordievsky fell in love. Layla Alieva was employed as a typist at the World Health Organization in Copenhagen. She was younger than Gordievsky, who struck her as experienced, intriguing, and well-versed in music and literature. Layla quickly realized that Oleg was not merely an embassy employee, but was involved with the KGB. Her father was a general in Azerbaijan state security, which meant she had been raised among those affiliated with the KGB. What Layla did not know was that her lover was simultaneously working for British intelligence. MI6 aimed to enhance the flow of information from the agent codenamed Sunnybeam. Oleg had a remarkable memory and could recount numerous specifics, but acquiring full copies of KGB documents was, of course, a primary objective. The British suggested providing Gordievsky with a mini-camera, enabling him to photograph papers directly at his workplace. However, Oleg dismissed this proposal, knowing that a single accidental glimpse from a colleague or the discovery of British surveillance equipment could threaten both his career and his life. It was subsequently decided that Gordievsky would discreetly take materials during his lunch break. At that time, documents from Moscow were dispatched to the Danish embassy on microfilm. MI6 directed their technical department to develop a small portable device for swiftly copying the film. Gordievsky would then take materials out of the embassy during his lunch break and deliver them to an MI6 officer. The officer would efficiently duplicate them within half an hour and return the copies to Oleg. It was crucial that this process was conducted with the utmost care, as any damage to the film could compromise the Soviet agent's safety. Gordievsky was aware of the names of numerous agents working for the KGB, not only in Denmark, but also in other Western nations. For MI6, there was a compelling temptation to exploit this information for immediate mass arrests or the removal of spies. However, the British opted for caution, recognizing that such actions would quickly raise alarms within the KGB. They knew that the source would be identified swiftly, jeopardizing Operation Sunnybeam and leaving its potential untapped. MI6 chose to take a strategic approach. The longer Gordievsky remained undetected, the further he could advance on the KGB's career ladder. The British began to proceed with caution. For instance, the agent Sunnybeam reported on several high-ranking government officials in Norway and Sweden who were collaborating with the KGB. MI6 concluded that exposing a few Soviet spies outside of Denmark would not arouse suspicion regarding the residency in Copenhagen or specifically Gordievsky's involvement. One of the uncovered spies was Governor Havik, an elderly official from the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as a Soviet agent with 3 decades of experience. Throughout her extensive espionage career, she had met with her KGB handlers hundreds of times and had relayed a substantial amount of classified information. Following the unexpected exposure of several spies, the KGB undoubtedly contemplated the possibility of a traitor in a high-ranking position. Gordievsky was keenly aware of this concern. For several weeks, he braced himself for his cover to be compromised, but that eventuality did not materialize. Gradually, the agent Sunnylight began to agree to receive financial rewards from MI6. While money was often a primary motivator for many working with foreign intelligence, this was not true for Gordievsky. Initially, he even set conditions stating that he would refuse financial rewards from the British, as his motives were rooted in ideology. Over time, most of his earnings were deposited into his British account, and Gordievsky understood that he might never actually access those funds. He maintained his secrecy regarding the affair from his wife and colleagues, even enlisting the help of close friends within the KGB residency to obtain crucial information. He continued to discreetly take valuable documents out during his lunch break, lying to everyone around him. Yet, at the same time, as he candidly admitted, Gordievsky felt for the first time like a genuinely honest person, a fighter against the totalitarian system. In 1978, Gordievsky received notice that he was to be transferred to Moscow. Staff rotation was a standard internal procedure within the State Security Committee. With the 40th anniversary approaching, it was anticipated that Gordievsky would return to his homeland with a promotion. However, family circumstances complicated this plan. His superiors became aware of his forthcoming divorce, which adversely impacted his reputation as an employee, and even more damaging was the disclosure of his infidelity during his time in Denmark. Consequently, Gordievsky was sent back to Moscow to deal with paperwork, accompanied by a demotion. Furthermore, due to the divorce, he faced the possibility of never being sent abroad again. Even before his departure from Denmark, the agent Sonny Light requested MI6 to devise a plan for his extraction from the Soviet Union. In intelligence terminology, such a mission is known as exfiltration. However, executing such an operation was nearly impossible, and British intelligence had never faced a situation like this before. If MI6 had needed to extract Gordievsky while he was serving in one of the Western nations, it would not have been a considerable challenge. Exfiltrating him from the Soviet Union was an entirely different scenario. Several options were evaluated, and it was ultimately determined to covertly smuggle Gordievsky across the Finnish border in the trunk of a British diplomatic vehicle. While diplomatic cars were not routinely inspected at the border, this was more of an unwritten guideline than a legal rule. This implied that Soviet border guards could indeed request to open the trunk. However, that was only part of the challenge. Initially, Gordievsky had to be discreetly transported to the border, while under the watchful eyes of KGB agents monitoring the British embassy staff. As per the plan, codenamed Pimlico, Gordievsky was to initiate the operation with a specific signal. On any Tuesday at 7:30 p.m., he was to position himself near a particular bakery on Kutuzovsky Prospect, carrying a bag from a British supermarket emblazoned with a prominent letter C. Each Tuesday at 7:30, a member of the British embassy staff, under the guise of visiting the bakery, would walk by the designated location while holding either a Mars or Kit Kat chocolate bar. If he spotted Gordievsky, the complex operation to extract the spy abroad would commence. The encrypted details of the plan were communicated to Gordievsky within a copy of The Tempest. He took the book with him to Moscow, knowing that if needed, he could soak the pages to reveal all the operation's specifics. Despite this meticulous planning, the likelihood of the Pimlico plan failing was substantial. Any number of crucial details could easily go wrong, yet this was the best MI6 could provide for their most valuable agent in the USSR. For the next 3 years, Gordievsky had no contact with MI6. The British chose to adopt a long-term strategy. They recognized that cooperation with Oleg on Soviet soil could yield results, but would likely be short-lived, as his KGB colleagues would soon discover him. However, if they waited for a new assignment for Agent Sonny Light abroad, the potential benefits would be much greater. Gordievsky was prepared to restart his career. He had divorced, married Leila Alieva, and their family had welcomed 2 small daughters. Although all of this negatively affected his career, he believed that in time he could regain lost opportunities. Alongside his primary work, Oleg was also learning English. He completed the 4-year KGB course in just 2 years. In 1981, a vacancy for the deputy head of political intelligence became available at the KGB residency in London. Gordievsky recognized this as his opportunity. He subtly indicated to his superiors that he was interested in this position. However, he was not their first choice. The British had denied visas to several candidates for the consul role due to concerns about their connections to the KGB. When MI6 received the request for approval of Oleg Gordievsky's visa, they could hardly believe their good fortune. Firstly, it indicated that their agent was safe, as there had been no news from him for 3 years. Secondly, the volume and significance of the classified information Gordievsky could share in London would be even greater than what he had provided in Copenhagen. Naturally, the British approved the diplomatic visa for the new employee of the Soviet embassy. Oleg Gordievsky and his family prepared to leave for London. Gordievsky's initial impression of the British capital was one of disappointment. He found the city to be noisier, dirtier, and less attractive than Copenhagen. His new superiors welcomed the deputy head of political intelligence without much enthusiasm. General Arkady Guk, who held the title of First Secretary of the Embassy, actually led the British residency of the State Security Committee. Gordievsky viewed his new boss as arrogant, poorly educated, and foolish, with a noticeable penchant for drinking. Arkady Guk was entirely convinced that British intelligence services were surveilling the employees of the Soviet embassy around the clock, tapping phones, installing spying devices in typewriters, and employing various other surveillance methods. Consequently, a pervasive atmosphere of paranoia settled over the London residency, with all new employees regarded with a certain degree of suspicion. Under these circumstances, Gordievsky needed to make contact with his handlers at MI6. He dialed the phone number provided to him a few years earlier in Copenhagen. Gordievsky's first meeting with MI6 felt like a scene from a spy thriller. During his lunch break, Oleg entered an unremarkable hotel. In the lobby, he was greeted by familiar members of the British Intelligence Service. Without exchanging words, they proceeded to the back exit, with Gordievsky cautiously trailing them from a distance. In the parking lot, they silently entered a car and drove off. It was only then that the handlers and the agent exchanged their first words. They headed to a safe house located at an optimal distance from the Soviet embassy, not too close to avoid stumbling upon Soviet diplomats, yet close enough for lunchtime meetings. This marked the beginning of a new phase in Gordievsky's collaboration with MI6. While he was in Moscow, he dedicated significant time to studying classified KGB documents. His colleagues believed Oleg's efforts were mainly aimed at impressing his superiors for a potential promotion. However, that was just one of the motives. Gordievsky was also focused on memorizing as many details as possible to report back to MI6 later. His primary task was to gather information about the spies and agents used by the KGB, those they had deployed, those currently active, and those they intended to recruit for intelligence gathering in the West. The insights Gordievsky provided proved invaluable to the British, as they had never had such comprehensive data on the inner workings and current status of the powerful KGB. A sense of relief spread within MI6 due to Gordievsky's assessment that the overall state of the main Soviet intelligence service had drastically declined from its impressive status several decades prior. In earlier years, high-ranking members of British intelligence, well-known politicians, and prominent public figures had been among the KGB agents. However, by the early 1980s, that situation had become much more modest. Many employees within the State Security Committee now perceived their roles as mere opportunities for financial gain. According to Gordievsky, one of the KGB's significant assets in Britain was Michael Foot, the chairman of the left-wing Labour Party. In 1983, parliamentary elections were scheduled in the United Kingdom, and the Liberal Party was considered the front-runner. If victorious, Michael Foot could ascend to the role of Prime Minister. Gordievsky claimed that he had come across documents in the committee's archives in Moscow indicating that Michael Foot had received funds from Soviet intelligence. However, in exchange, he did not offer any confidential information and served more as an agent of influence for the USSR than an actual spy. Foote used the money to support a socialist magazine. Following the Prague Spring in 1968, according to Gordievsky, the politician completely severed ties with the KGB. Technically, Michael Foote had not violated any laws, but this information was sufficient to effectively end his political career. It remains uncertain why the information was not made public immediately in 1982. Nevertheless, a year later, Michael Foote lost the elections to Margaret Thatcher and did not assume the role of Prime Minister. His connections to the KGB continue to spark debate in the United Kingdom. The initial years following Gordievsky's assignment to London marked the most productive phase in his work with MI6. He supplied the British with a vast amount of classified data that aided in unveiling Soviet spies across various Western nations. However, the most significant accomplishment of his collaboration is regarded as the prevention of nuclear war. The early 1980s, as noted by many historians, represented a period when the world was perilously close to apocalypse, reminiscent of the Cuban Missile Crisis 2 decades earlier. Soviet leader Yuri Andropov believed that Western nations were genuinely preparing for a nuclear attack on the USSR. Consequently, all KGB residencies abroad received directives to seek any evidence of an imminent assault. According to Gordievsky, many of his colleagues in the London residency interpreted this as a sign of Andropov's paranoia. Nevertheless, the intelligence gathered from their agent about the true sentiments within the Soviet leadership was crucial for MI6. Neither Britain nor the United States sought to provoke a conflict that could lead to an apocalypse, so they modified their military strategies accordingly. As a result, it is thought that the intelligence supplied by Gordievsky to the West in the early 1980s played a crucial role in averting nuclear war. The materials Gordievsky provided were highly valuable and frequently made their way to the desk of Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. She was aware of a high-ranking agent within the KGB, yet even she was not privy to his true identity as revealed by MI6. To Thatcher, he was referred to by the pseudonym Mr. Collins. In 1984, young Politburo member Mikhail Gorbachev visited the country, and Thatcher aimed to enhance relations with the Soviet Union. MI6 actively employed Gordievsky to help prepare for Gorbachev's arrival. He provided the British with crucial insights into the issues and concerns that the Soviet side would likely raise. Simultaneously, information from Thatcher was passed to the Soviets through Gordievsky. This was, of course, conducted in secrecy and presented as effective intelligence work by him. Consequently, the visit proved to be very successful. This success was one of the reasons why, in 1985, KGB leaders chose to appoint Oleg Gordievsky as the head of the residency in the United Kingdom. Before this, MI6 had been actively assisting their agent in advancing his career. They consistently shared valuable information with Gordievsky that, while not compromising the country's security, highlighted his importance to the KGB. Moreover, the British eliminated barriers posed by Gordievsky's superiors. For instance, in 1984, the head of the residency, Arkady Guk, was declared a persona non grata under the guise of intelligence activities. Gordievsky's deputy, subsequently assumed his position. He was first elevated to head of the Political Intelligence Department, and a year later, he became the head of the residency. This marked a significant achievement for MI6. Potentially, Gordievsky, in the role of resident, could access highly sensitive secrets. Equally important were the agent's future prospects. Who knows, he might even become the head of the KGB down the line. What neither Gordievsky nor MI6 was aware of at that time was that 2 weeks prior to the new resident's arrival, the KGB had acquired a highly valuable agent of its own. Aldrich Ames was not among the CIA's most successful operatives. By the mid-1980s, he held a relatively solid position in the Soviet division of the U.S. intelligence agency. However, this position came with limited pay, and Ames's young wife desired a lavish lifestyle. Consequently, he racked up significant debts and found himself in urgent need of money. He decided to sell classified information to those who would be most interested, the Soviet authorities. MI6 shared Gordievsky's intelligence with Allied intelligence agencies in the West, including the CIA, but they did not reveal the source's identity. This created a challenge for the Americans, as it felt somewhat awkward and unprofessional to present significant intelligence regarding the Soviet nuclear program to President Reagan without mentioning where it came from. Consequently, the CIA conducted its own investigation. They utilized the information from MI6 and, through a process of elimination, concluded that the source was KGB officer Oleg Gordievsky, stationed in London. Aldrich Ames was part of the CIA division responsible for handling this investigation. During one of the initial meetings with representatives from the USSR, he reported that MI6 had a crucial agent occupying a high-ranking position within the KGB. Ames had not yet revealed the agent's name. Nevertheless, this information was sufficient to trigger one of the most intensive operations in the history of the KGB, aimed at identifying a traitor. The day after Aldrich Ames's meeting with the KGB, Oleg Gordievsky received a telegram summoning him urgently to Moscow. The official reason given was a meeting between the new resident in London and his superiors in the USSR. MI6 faced a daunting dilemma. It was quite possible that Gordievsky had been compromised by the KGB, and his call to Moscow could be just a pretext for arrest. In that scenario, it would be wiser for him to remain in place and surrender to British authorities, thus bringing an end to the story of their most valuable agent. However, if this were merely a routine work summons and Gordievsky returned to his post as head of the residency, MI6 would have struck gold. Ultimately, the British conveyed their concerns to Gordievsky, but allowed him to make the final decision. He chose to go, acknowledging the risk, but believing that the potential reward of a positive outcome was greater. Before heading to the airport, Gordievsky bid farewell to his wife Layla and his daughters, who were still unaware of his work with MI6. If the KGB had indeed compromised him, he might never see his family again. Viktor Budanov was tasked with capturing the traitor within the KGB, and some even called him the most dangerous man in state security. He was responsible for overseeing the search and installation of surveillance in Gordievsky's Moscow apartment. When Oleg Gordievsky found the door to his apartment locked tight, he understood that he was under observation. However, if he wasn't apprehended immediately at the airport, It indicated that the KGB had not yet concluded their investigation. The following day, he met with one of the KGB leaders, Viktor Grushko, who was also joined by Viktor Budanov. The sole source detailing the events that transpired that day in Grushko's office was Gordievsky himself. He recounted that what initially seemed like a work-related drinking session soon turned sinister as he realized some substances had been mixed into his cognac, leading him to lose control of the situation. At that moment, his colleagues began a genuine interrogation, accusing him of being a British spy and pressing him for confessions and specifics. In line with what he had learned at KGB school, Gordievsky denied everything. The next day, the colonel awakened in an unfamiliar bed. He was then taken home, where the KGB informed him that he would not be going to London. His rank was reduced, and he no longer had access to active operations. Gordievsky tried to comprehend why he hadn't been arrested yet if the KGB knew about his connections to MI6. The only logical explanation was that state security still lacked solid evidence and was in pursuit of it. Meanwhile, in London, a staff member from the Soviet embassy arrived at the Gordievsky family home. He instructed Layla to prepare for a trip to Moscow, stating that her husband had fallen ill and they needed to leave immediately. MI6 operatives observed all of this and realized that the urgent departure of the family to Moscow was likely a precursor to Gordievsky's arrest. A decision was made to ensure full readiness for Operation Pimlico. Oleg Gordievsky realized he was running out of time. Soon, the KGB would uncover the evidence needed to prove his collaboration with MI6. Consequently, a decision had to be made. After his family returned to Moscow, he explained to them that he had enemies within the KGB who were attempting to falsely accuse him. Operation Pimlico initially aimed at facilitating the escape of the entire family, 2 adults and 2 children. Gordievsky faced a choice: either inform Layla about the planned escape and secure her consent, or escape alone. He tried to drop hints to her and inquire about the possibility of fleeing together. Based on her reaction, he concluded that he could not trust her and made the difficult decision to go on his own. Since Pimlico had been placed on full alert, a staff member from the British Embassy visited the same bakery on Kutuzovsky Prospect every day at 7:30, waiting for a man carrying a package marked with the letter C. Finally, one day, while holding a Mars bar, he spotted the man. They exchanged glances for a few seconds, marking the official start of Gordievsky's exfiltration. Oleg returned home, soaked the pages of a Shakespeare book, and began studying the specifics of his forthcoming escape. On Friday, July 19, 1985, Gordievsky donned a tracksuit and left his apartment. Aware that the KGB was watching him, he pretended to go for a run. During this act, he managed to evade surveillance, slipped into the metro, and made his way to the train station, where he boarded the night train to Leningrad. Early on the morning of July 20th, he arrived in Leningrad. From there, he took a train to Zelenogorsk, and then boarded a bus bound for Vyborg. He got off in the wilderness at a stop named 836 kilometers, where vehicles with British diplomats were waiting for him. They had also narrowly escaped KGB surveillance. However, the most difficult challenge lay ahead: the border crossing. The diplomats arrived in 2 cars as they were anticipating the escape of the entire family. Gordievsky was completely stripped down and treated with a special solution meant to deter guard dogs at the border. The British had made extensive preparations for the escape, even bringing along a small child from the embassy staff to potentially distract the border guards. Ultimately, they were halted for a document check at the Soviet border checkpoint before entering Finland. A guard, accompanied by a dog, was patrolling nearby. After several excruciating minutes of waiting, their car was finally permitted to pass. If the Soviet border guards had opened the trunk, they would have discovered Oleg Gordievsky curled up and nearly naked inside. A few days before Gordievsky's escape, Aldrich Ames revealed the identities of 24 spies within the KGB, one of whom was Oleg Gordievsky. To this day, it remains unclear why he was not arrested immediately. Perhaps Budanov and his subordinate were not in a rush. They were likely searching for substantial evidence of the officer's culpability. The KGB believed that Gordievsky stood no chance of fleeing the country while under constant surveillance. After he vanished, the Soviet security services spent considerable time searching for the body of their former employee, suspecting he had committed suicide. Later, once they acknowledged that it had been an escape, the KGB attempted to downplay Gordievsky's access to classified information, asserting that he was not such an essential employee and could not have disclosed anything significant to Western intelligence agencies. However, the fact that even 30 years later, many witnesses from the KGB side refused to discuss the details of the events speaks volumes. Despite extensive diplomatic efforts from the British authorities, Leila Aliyeva and her daughters were only permitted to travel to Britain to reunite with their husband and father 5 years later. The couple's efforts to rebuild their family life were unsuccessful, and after 2 years, they ultimately separated. Their daughters remained in Britain while Leila continues to live between 2 countries. 86-year-old Oleg Gordievsky still resides in the United Kingdom under a false name in a safe house under protection.